the calcium, if you're operating on a small scale and making good money, which it sounds like you probably are, the kind of calcium I've been using is called carbonatite, and it comes out of Canada. It's a volcanic mineral. It's highly reactive, which means it's very available. It's got 9% trace elements. It's like an azurite limestone with a little bit of phosphorus, a little bit of potassium. It's an amazing material. I've spread that on my pastures, and I've seen, what was goldenrod and brambles, and not brambles per se, but more like the low-growing kind of really goldenrod, those kind of brambles, and milkweed turned to clover over the winter just by spreading this stuff down in a way that I have not seen. I mean, it was just like one size fits all. If you got low calcium, this stuff got traces. It's available calcium. It's wonderful. It's called carbonatite. And it comes out of Ontario. I think the company's name is Boreal Agro Minerals. But again, it's one of the things we've got in our mineral depots. It's not available. You're not going to find it in stores, garden supply stores. You can run your own tractor trailer down here if you want. We've got 10 or 12 tons sitting in the depot right now. But carbonatite is the product, and it's a geological term for a type of magma flow.
And for us, where is the closest mineral depot?
The way it works is you join the organization because you don't have access to the mineral depot if you're not a member, because it's a buying club, and we don't have to deal with laws of sales and fertilizer regulations. So it's a private buying club. What you do, hopefully, is your chapter meets and puts together an order, and then we'll ship it down to you. It doesn't make sense for 1 bag to get shipped to you and 3 bags to get shipped to them and 2 pounds of copper to be shipped over here. We don't make any money on it in the first place. The staff is getting paid a pittance anyways. So the more you guys can coordinate locally and put together a 3-ton load or something like that, then we can ship it down here. You can have an excuse to hang out and get to know each other better. That's the idea behind the chapters, is that you guys coordinate and you talk to us, and then we'll help you out. Okay. But if you try to call us up, we will support you, and it's going to be a total hassle. And understand there's people all over the country in your exact position, and we want to help out, but we have a hard time saying no. And if you can coordinate with your local group, then that's going to be better for everybody involved. David, who's the coordinator, is absolutely totally strung out right now. He's an amazing sweetheart guy. He's an agronomist, and he is just tearing his hair out with all the people all over the country who are calling him up and asking these questions. I'm like, oh no, it's working too well. Anyway, all right. Sources of traces. Azomite was a question here. Dynamin is a product that's available from AgriDynamics again. Azomite is a material. It's a high energy. It's called a montmorillonite family clay. There's all kinds of products that are montmorillonite family clays. Azomite is one that's been bought by a company with an advertising budget, so you've heard about it. There's all kinds of other ones which cost much less, which are just as good. Somebody was saying the Azomite mine is up against. Yeah. Well, there's plenty of others out there that cost less. Dynamin is the one I use. DYNA-MIN.
That's what they micronize and put in the inoculant that I really recommend and use. The one that I can say that I've used that works.
Do you use that to inoculate seeds?
Mm-hmm.
I spent an hour and a half last night.
It's called
and all I
soil
could find was
biology boost.
bees. I found the soil biology boost.
Yeah.
I saw that.
That's, yeah.
Dynamin's in there.
I don't grow beans, so.
What did you say?
I don't grow beans, and all the inoculants were for beans.
That's the point. People only think that you inoculate your legumes with nitrogen fixers.
There's more and more products coming out.
The general understanding is only that we have legume nitrogen fixers on, and that's it. Any product you buy, like if you look into the general literature, that's as far as the general understanding has gone. Right? What you're being taught here is 3 steps off the cutting edge. You will hear about it in 10 years.
No, actually,
It's happening.
Seed company,
it's coming around.
Seed companies for conventional farmers, they're
Yeah.
doing now these inoculants. The same thing when we're doing the minerals, the biology, and the enzyme stimulants. To.
But if you're just searching around the web for inoculants, most of what you're going to find.
With bean,
First thing-
and man, I did a thorough search last night.
Yeah. All right. I am going to say this is good enough over here. I really want to get to the agenda, and I'm skipping your morning break. Are we okay with that? Ticks and Lyme. Ticks and Lyme.
No,
I go barefoot. My children go barefoot.
this is dynamite.
Um,
Another thing for asthma.
I don't know about ticks and Lyme. Lyme's been around where I live for 20, 30 years, since the 80s, I think we've had Lyme around. My sister got Lyme when I was a kid. My father's gotten Lyme. What's that? When my sister had it in the 80s, I remember hearing one of the doctors tell us that they had tested the people in Lyme, Connecticut, where it came from, technically, theoretically. And they found that 80% of the people had the antibodies, which means they had been bitten by a Lyme tick, they just never gotten sick. So for me, we have all these pathogens, we have all these toxins, we have all these stuff in the atmosphere and the environment, and trying to protect yourself from something feels like a real serious pain in the butt. I've got staph. I got a staph infection one time when my brother bit me when we were fighting, and like, I know it's in my body, but if I take care of myself, it doesn't show up. And so I think about a lot of these diseases are like, I'm just going to figure that I'm exposed to it, that it's there, but that my immune system is strong enough to resist it. That may not be a good enough answer to you. But
If you want to control it on a small area, the easiest way is getting tubes of cotton that are treated with permethrin, and the deer mice are the real carriers, not the
That's right, they did a
deer.
study on that.
And they take those back to their nests, and it knocks out all the deer ticks. Because they build their nests out of that cotton. You can make it yourself. You can buy it called Damnix, and it's $75 for a box of 12 tubes.
from my experience, there's a whole other thing about the insects that are sort of pest insects. I don't know about the I have this feeling about the energy of your land, and I don't know what happens, but my kids are running around barefoot all the time, everywhere, and they don't get ticks, and I don't get ticks climbing up
Some
me.
ticks germinate on bare soil, or very short.
I don't know what
And
the
I know
story
they're in
is.
the woods a lot,
Yeah.
but like, I've noticed.
Even in
on
the
my
woods, I
dad's
go
farm,
walking
like,
around all over the
stuff,
woods.
Like, so,
I don't know if birds eat them. I don't know.
chickens definitely.
You know,
Sure.
I do design and consulting work a lot, and I've found that same thing on just,
Yeah.
I've walked like
You walk
100
around.
sites in the last
Yeah.
5 years. And it's just, there's a certain feel to the site, and I'm like, I'm gonna get a ton of seed ticks today.
Yeah.
Some places have them and some places don't, and the energy of the land has a lot to do with it. And I don't know how it works or how to get it or how to make it, but I feel like, my experience is, I'm wearing a lot more clothing than I usually do, right? I got shoes on. This does not happen for most people, only when I go out, right? I just, to the concept of covering myself up and tying my, socks over my pants and all that stuff, it's not worth it to me. The quality of life is not worth it to me, that fear. So, but my experience has been something about the energy of the land, they're not there in some places. And so for me, it's about really building that overall larger energetic.
I also cover myself with coconut oil and try
Yeah.
to limit, like, maybe the carbon dioxide that can come out of my skin or something, but they have a harder time dripping, especially, like, mainly on my legs. They can still fall on you, but if I cover my legs really well with, like, coconut oil,
Yeah.
I don't really have issues.
I don't even think about it. I just don't even think about it. And I don't know.
That's probably key to, like, what you're attracting.
I don't know. I don't know. I don't have an answer for you. That's why I didn't talk. I don't know. Except what I've said. I do want to get onto this handout. We can basically skip through the first 5 slides because they're only talking about what we're going to be talking about. The bottom slide is talking about planting seeds and early childhood development. I think I've referred to early childhood development a couple of times. Last slide on page 1 of day 2. Day 2, last slide. I referred to early childhood development yesterday and the concept of what we understand with humans, which is that what occurs early in the human's life has a profound effect on the overall life cycle function of the human. Not that you can't change it, but that what happens early in life really sets you in a trajectory. And as I understand it, that's extremely similar with plants. What goes on early in a plant's life has a profound effect on the rest of its life. So this is a time of year when people are starting their seedlings and things when, in many cases, they're deeply traumatizing their children, right? Really screwing them up. We all do a lot of things that are really categorically destructive to our seeds, to our seedlings, and we don't understand it. So I really want to spend most of the time between now and lunch going over some of those early childhood strategies, logistics, and details from starting the seed all the way to getting the plants into the ground. A friend of mine who's studied these things says basically we lose about 50% of our yield potential by the time we put the plants into the ground. By the time you put the plants into the ground, you have screwed them up so deeply. You have been,
If you're transplanting?
yeah. So if you're doing transplants, if you're doing transplants, in general, the practices that we engage in with transplanting are so traumatic that much of the plant's yield potential has been lost. So I just want to review a few points here, and then we'll just see how the conversation proceeds. So seed soaking, we didn't talk, I don't think much about seed soaking. I might have referenced it lightly. The idea here, and this is also, I want to just touch on this for a second, for people who are feeding animals. Some people here have animals and feed them grain. My understanding is that seeds have this thing called phytase inhibitors in them, which is a compound which makes them indigestible. So from the perspective of the seed, its objective is to go in one end, out the other, into a really nice fertility package and germinate. Right? Some of them get crushed up, but enough of them, from the seed's perspective, think about it from the seed's perspective. Some of them get crushed up, but enough of them make it through. They are designed to make it through your entire digestive tract and not be digested, and to get planted in this beautiful little fertility package, like I said. You got it. So these phytase inhibitors are the compounds that make them indigestible. When you crack a seed, when you turn wheat into flour, the phytase inhibitor doesn't go away, right? When you make, pellets for your chickens, for your pigs, if you feed your cows cracked grain, right? Those phytase inhibitors are still there. Actually, when you cook yourself rice or beans, you just cook them. The phytase inhibitors are still there. They're evolved not to be digested, and so you've got to trick the seed into being digestible if you actually want to get the value out of it. And so what a lot of traditional cultures do before they cook their grain is they soak it, right? They soak their beans overnight. I know in India, they soak your rice overnight. You never just cook your beans. You never cook your chickpeas. You never cook your dal. You never cook your rice. You always soak it overnight before you cook it. And the soaking process is basically tricking that seed into thinking it's germinating. And as soon as it thinks it's germinating, it releases the phytase inhibitors, and the nutritional value goes through the roof. The actual amount of nutrition you get out of the seed goes up when you soak it first. So this is a trick for us as humans who are eating grains, but it's also a trick if you're feeding animals and you're buying grain. If you buy whole grain, which costs a lot less than cracked grain or pellet grain, because they didn't have to put the work into it, and then you soak it, you get more nutrition for less money for your animals. It's a minor point here, but I think it's also pertinent when we're talking about starting seeds, that soaking the seed is how you cause it to think it's germinating. And for things you have a hard time germinating or are slow to germinate, et cetera, whether you're planting spinach out in the field or carrots out in the field, and carrots are hard to soak and then plant, but whenever I'm planting seeds into an environment that is less than optimal, soaking is one of the tricks that I use to, put my finger on the scale towards, success. So
Carrots are easy to soak and plant.
I'll walk through the logistics of small seeds and how you deal with them. It's much easier with large seeds. It's much easier to soak a bean or a pea or a corn or a squash seed than it is to soak a lettuce seed or a arugula seed or a carrot seed. But what I do is simply get a bowl of water and put my seeds into it at night before I go to bed that I'm planning on planting in the morning. And I put a little bit of kelp, 4% kelp in there, plus or minus. 1% seawater. And the easiest way to make seawater is to take sea salt and add water, for those who didn't know.
How cool was that?
How cool is that? That was real hard.
Is there a quantity?
I don't know the recipe for how many, teaspoons of salt equals how many gallons of seawater. I don't know the recipe, but I'm sure it can be figured out. One looked on the magical interwebs.
Seed, I need a teaspoon per gallon.
A teaspoon per gallon?
Yeah.
Okay. So basically just a shake of a salt shaker is all you need into a bowl of water that you're going to be soaking your seed in. I will soak it overnight. And then, depending on the size of the seed, I do not need to do anything complicated with it. I can simply pour the water off if it's like a bean or a pea or something like that. Or if it's a small seed like a lettuce or arugula or a carrot or something like that, I'll need to pour it into like a tea strainer and then spread the seed out on a paper towel or cloth or something like that. Ideally, warm temperatures and low humidity until the seed does not stick together anymore. We don't want the seed to dry out. We don't want the seed to dehydrate. We want it to still be expanded and moist, because that's what you're trying to do with the whole soaking process.
And you can run that through a seeder then?
I don't use cedars.
At all?
Fluid seeder.
I don't use cedars. No. So probably they're much more delicate once they're expanded, and you have to use a different seed. You'd have to use a different hole size.
Do the shaker and vibrator things work?
I have not found any cedars that I like. I may just be obnoxious about this, but I find that broadcasting is just a lot easier for me. And I broadcast a lot more than I should. I
You mean like
broadcast,
this?
yes. I broadcast my,
Carrot seed, I just mix it with sand to thin it out, and put radish seed in to break the crust of the soil as it's coming up, and I put it in a furrow, water it in, and then put sand on top of it, so you get no crust and weeds. And it'll come right up. I planted carrot seed the other week. It already had radicals an eighth of an inch long. I'm going to have forked roots because I left it go too long. But I fluid seeded that. I put it in a cornstarch gel. And or sometimes I'll use the soil moist, ground down fine, and make a gel out of that. Put it in a Ziploc bag, cut off the corner, and squeeze out a line of it as a
Nice.
paste. There are fluid seeders available for doing that. If you want to do carrots on a big scale, I'd really recommend getting something like that, so you can get them up in 3-4 days, and not 21 days.
they should,
Dry
most
seed.
seeds should germinate in a few days, right? And most seeds should germinate in a few days. If they're taking 2 weeks, if they're taking 10 days,
Well,
something's not right.
Carrot put in dry normally takes about 2 to 3 weeks.
So I'm going to walk you through the process of planting, which involves making sure that the soil's moist and it's got good conductivity. And if you do put the carrot or anything else in that situation, when I'm planting my salad greens, if they're not up in 2 days, something's wrong. I mean, 48 hours
Yeah,
is
some stuff.
is about what it takes. Lettuce, arugula, spinach might take another day, but things should not take too long. They really shouldn't take too long to
Part of
germinate.
that is probably the normalization of seed distribution that is, seeds without vigor, right? Like, where seed either hasn't been kept properly or
Yes.
the
The
seed-
lower the vigor, the longer germination takes. Absolutely correlation there. Either way, seed soaking is not something I do a hell of a lot, but I want to just sort of leave it there as one more trick in the toolbox for you to have access to.
You don't
Inoculation.
add humates at all?
What's that?
You don't add humates in your mix of the seed soaking?
Maybe a touch.
'Cause
Yeah.
that really stimulates root growth a whole lot,
Yeah.
humates.
They are in the mix that I'm going to be putting into the ground when I plant. I've got a whole nother, soaking is something that happens occasionally. A nice mix of goodies it goes into the ground when I plant happens for everything. That includes humates and a bunch of other things.
I like to do peas, early peas, because once you turn start spreading the sprouting operation, the starches change in there and they no longer are susceptible to fungi and they don't rot in the soil. Once they're started to sprout, they always come up, even the soil's real cold.
Yeah. There's all kinds of tricks. You're full of them. Inoculation, we talked about before already. So, if you're going to be soaking your seed, generally you put the inoculant on afterwards, not before. You put seed under water for 12 hours and the inoculant's going to wake up, use up all the oxygen probably, and die. So, you generally want to inoculate seed after you've soaked it, if you're going to soak it. Potting soil mineral, We talked about that, you know, amending your potting soil with the spectrum of nutrients that you'd like to have in your soil. You don't want to just have the cobalt and molybdenum and copper and zinc and boron and calcium in your soil. You want your babies to have access to it between when they're born and kindergarten when you transplant them out as well. Biological activity and temperature of soil and air. Sorry, my phone's ringing. I need to turn it off. Florida. If you go into the city in the summertime and you go into a building, they got this thing called a air conditioner. Temperatures will be set to like 70 degrees. If you go into the city in the wintertime and they got, you know, a heater, thermostat will be set to 70 degrees. You may have noticed this. You guys don't have it get that cold in the winter, but you probably have heaters in your houses. Doesn't even get 0 down here?
Last year it was 10 below twice, 10 miles
Now
from here.
that's counting as,
And it
as
was
cold.
5 below on another day.
10, 15 below counts as winter.
And that's two
Anything sh-
thermometers and the Richmond forecast. They're on 2 different stations.
I was going to say, I
verifying.
couldn't believe it doesn't get to 0. That's
Well, 10 miles from here it did.
There's so many microclimates in the mountains and stuff.
yeah.
We're a lot colder.
Yeah, anyways, I don't need to keep going back to the temperature, but if you read the Johnny's Seed Catalog and you see the, you know, the temperature, the germination by soil temperature chart, you'll see at, you know, 50 degrees, you'll get soil temperature, you'll get 60% germination. At 60 degrees soil temperature, you'll get 80% germination. At 70 degrees soil temperature, you'll get 95% germination. At 80 degrees soil temperature, you'll get 80% germination. There's like this up to 70 and then down. Like germination occurs at 70 for a lot of things in a peak manner. We set our houses for 70. My understanding is that it's not just the plants and the animals that like 70, that the bacteria and the fungi like 70 also, or at least closer to 70 than the 30. My understanding is that when you put your seeds into cold soil or you put your seedlings into cold soil, the level of life in the soil is low, right? They're shivering at 35 degrees. They're shivering at 45 degrees. It's only when you get to 50, 55, 60, 65 that they really begin to, you know, to come out and flourish and achieve much higher levels of biological of activity. If it's the soil life that are the ones that the plant's feeding that are feeding the plant, and they're too busy shivering, then what happens when you put your plants into cold soil is they don't get fed. To my understanding, that's basically how it happens. And so, you know, you can cheat, you can make nutrient availability, you can do soluble nutrients, you can violate the principles. But in general, the idea here is that there's a nice correlation between biological activity and soil temperature. And when you're rushing to put things in early in the spring, they actually don't do well in many cases because the soil's too cold. And so you either need to warm the soil up or plant your seedlings later. Reams we were talking about last night, Carrie Reams was able to grow green beans from planting the seed to picking beans in 3 weeks. Anybody done beans before? You know how long it takes to grow beans?
56 days.
A little bit longer than 3 weeks. Yeah, right. So Reams was able to do it in 3 weeks, and he did that by applying a foliar spray every 15 minutes, as I understand. He basically had a little mister.
Okay.
It's cheating. It's cheating. But the point is, as Reams said, that plants do not have pituitary glands. Plants' growth is not regulated by time. Plants' growth is regulated by nutrient availability.
And osmosis, and he says osmosis is not limited by time.
Yeah. So, has anybody ever transplanted in, you know, summer squash seedlings or cucumber seedlings and not had enough seedlings and run out and you finish the bed with seeds?
And they grew faster.
And then 3 weeks later, the ones you planted as seeds that were 3 weeks younger than the seedlings are bigger than the ones in the seedlings. Yes?
Mhm.
Anybody ever put tomatoes into the ground in, I don't know when you guys put them in, beginning of May, end of April? And the tomatoes that are volunteering are just germinating around then, or maybe a week later. And by the end of August, those ones that you planted are struggling, and the ones that you didn't plant, the ones that germinated themselves, are big and broad and full of fruit. You guys have those down here? Volunteer tomatoes?
Oh, yeah.
Yeah. My experience is that plants that germinate into an optimal environment and don't experience restrictions actually grow much more rapidly with much greater vigor and vitality. They get better, yields, better pest and disease resistance. That a lot of the work we do to put a jump on the season actually stresses our plants out, and the long-term systemic effect is negative, not positive. So one of the pieces of the puzzle in this whole conversation, as far as I'm concerned, is actually temperature and temperature of the soil. I generally suggest for cold weather plants, when the soil is below 50 degrees temperature, you're going to have, a rough time of it. You shouldn't be really putting your things into the ground before the soil's around 50 degrees. Some things will grow, no doubt. I mean, I put my salad greens in February. It was 15 below. They germinated. They were growing. Plants will grow. It's just more stressful for them. And if you're talking about growing big plants you want to run through the whole season, I think it's not the optimal idea to be engaging in. One thing you can do is you can warm the soil up, right? You can use Rime. You can use little plastic greenhouses. There's lots of ways to warm the soil up. But understand that there's a correlation between warmth of soil and biological activity and plant vigor and vitality, because that's the soil life that's feeding the plant. It's a basic point I want to make.
High biotic activity in the soil can make the
Heat.
temperature difference maybe 5 degrees. And
Oh,
if
yeah.
Rime left on all winter in March, your soil under the Rime is 10 degrees higher than soil right outside of it.
Absolutely. One layer of cover over the soil, 2 layers of cover over the soil will dramatically increase its temperature. So if you want to put things in early, make sure you've helped to get the soil temperature up ahead of time. I'm not saying don't put things in early. I'm saying make sure the soil temperature is up, because that's critical in the biological activity, which is critical in the vigor and the vitality of the plant. You fly over the Midwest in the middle of the winter and you see some fields are white and some fields are brown. Anybody done that?
Yeah.
Did it snow there or not there? Are they plowing in the middle of January? The snow is melting in some fields and not melting in other fields because of the levels of life in the soil. There's a direct correlation. Absolutely.
Pictures of like when we seeded our farm and it snowed a bunch, and then where each plant was, like it was melting
Yeah.
from the biological.
Where the rye is growing in the cover crops, the snow melts faster, and when you got bare soil, the snow stays longer. Anybody seen that? Yep. I mean, there's a nice correlation there with biological activity and soil temperature, soil temperature and biological activity. They both feed each other.
I keep my worm bin warm through biological activity,
Mm-hmm.
feeding composts that are not finished.
Yeah.
And so I'm able to maintain 50 to 60 degrees all winter long,
Yeah.
covered with a hoop house.
People heat hoop houses with compost piles.
Yep.
There's a biomailer thing where you can basically build a compost pile on the north side of your hoop house and run PEX tubing through it, and you can pump heat from the compost pile into your hoop house in a totally passive way, except for running the pump to keep your greens from growing all winter long. People grow tomatoes that way in Vermont.
Will Allen is a really good
Yeah.
resource with growing power. Sometimes he puts compost in the corners of the hoop houses that are not finished, or sometimes he puts unfinished compost underneath and then a layer of wood chip, and then it's finished compost, and it grows so that the heat coming up.
Yeah.
And then sometimes he puts the compost, this is like Milwaukee, so it's really cold, but he'll layer the compost or wood chip up on the sides of the hoop house on the outside also to
Exactly.
help keep.
Exactly.
What's his name?
Will
Allen.
Allen with Growing Power. If you ever get a chance to go to a workshop with him or go out there, they make really low cost workshops. It's an amazing experience to go out there and see what he's doing.
Okay, access to water. We talked about the critical role of water yesterday. I don't think I need to review that too much more. Spacing and SRI, I think this is my chance to talk about that, so this will take a couple minutes to go into this topic. I think it's a really important one. SRI, who here knows what SRI? Anybody here knows SRI? One.
System of rice intensification?
Precisely. Yes, exactly.
Oh, yeah.
What was it?
System of rice intensification. One might ask
Rice?
why I'm talking about rice. I'll have to wait until I get done telling you. System of rice intensification is one of the most powerful, vibrant, having systemic effect, global grassroots farmers movements, I'm aware of. This series of extraordinarily simple practices is powerfully affecting millions of people, dozens of countries, millions of hectares of land. It's an amazing, amazing story that you've, in many cases, never heard of. Right? It's because nobody's making any money on it. There's no big NGOs that are popularizing it. This is what the Gates Foundation should be doing. Right? This is what the Ford Foundation should be doing, is supporting this kind of work. This is powerfully, powerfully impacting growers. It's really simple. So the backstory is there was a French Jesuit missionary in Madagascar who was going down to convert the savages, and he did his 7-year stint down there as a missionary. And as he was getting ready to leave, he had a little short conversation with God about what work he'd been able to accomplish. And God sort of told him, hey, you haven't really been doing much of value down here, just so we're